Legal.
Joining us today is Amanda Sichlin Lovu, who is practicing as an advocate from the Chambers Advocates of Zimbabwe. We are so glad to have her with us.
Hello and welcome to That's My Legal Opinion. Today we are talking about a topic that is everywhere. We are discussing defamation, where we can then see what the fine line is between free speech and an expensive mistake, where we see that even if you think it's the truth, can you really afford to say it? Today we're joined by advocate Amanda, who's going to help us answer these questions. But before we get into that, we'd like to get to know our advocate a little better. So, what inspired you to study law?
To study law.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm one of those people that has known that I want to be a lawyer, I think as early as grade one. I remember being quite young and talkative and inquisitive. And my aunt actually said to me, one day you should be a lawyer because you talk so much. And I just took that idea and grew with it. Obviously, as I grew up, I got to understand what a lawyer is more and more. I've always been somebody who loves to read. I've always been somebody who loves to solve problems. I took, a liking to art subjects. I read a lot of books. And so it just so happened that I continued with that pursuit of law. And in high school, I think by the time I got to high school, I was quite sure that that's what I wanted to do. And I think once I had that in my mind, everything that I did then aligned with studying law.
Okay, now that's interesting. And so everyone who's studying law or has studied law at some point has been called advocates. You always get an advocate. How are you? Just because you're doing law, but you are a real advocate. May you please help us with the distinction of what an actual advocate is and, a regular lawyer?
Okay. So interestingly, in Zim, there actually is no such thing as an advocate. We're all legal practitioners at law. So we're all, okay, you said the difference between an advocate and a lawyer. Firstly, all of them are lawyers. We're all lawyers. As soon as you study law, you become a lawyer, right? And then after registration, historically and traditionally, the difference would be then being an attorney and an advocate.
Okay.
And that's when you have what is called the divided bar in the profession. So now you have a bunch of lawyers and then they group up into two groups, attorneys and advocates. And this is the traditional system. The attorneys are the ones who work at a law firm. They do your ordinary day-to-day legal work. An advocate is then considered somewhat of a specialist in that they don't take direct instructions from clients. Our clients then become the attorneys.
Okay.
The attorneys refer work to advocates.
And now on to Legally Fictional.
We watched Suits. I'm a fan. And Mike Ross, impressive. He knows the laws, all of these things. But he wasn't a real lawyer.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, in Zim, in our legal setup, how long would it take for someone to get caught doing Mike Ross style?
It depends.
Mm.
It depends. If you're very careful about it, I think you could get away with it, but I don't think you could get away with going to court. Yeah.
Do you think if you and Mike Ross understand, no, in court, who would win?
Me versus Mike Ross.
Mm.
That's an interesting one.
It's okay to teach your court.
In court,
Mm.
I think I'd beat him in court.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. But Sickles is very, it's a lot less about what happened in court, which I think is actually more realistic than a lot of people realize. Problems are not won or lost or solved in the courtroom. It's normally all the stuff that you do outside. So if you pay attention to Suits, half the time it's about the things that they're doing outside of the courtroom in order to push a certain outcome in court.
Okay. Oh, that's fair.
So yeah, it would be an interesting case. I think we'd have to fight it back and forth.
No, I'd love to watch that.
Yeah.
Now, on to our topic for the day. We just like to start from the basics. We have the constitutional rights of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of conscience. So basically, you're allowed to think what you want, say what you want, except when it comes to, defamation. What then constitutes defamation?
Okay, so at law, there is actually a set formula or requirement or a definition of what constitutes defamation. Loosely, you have to show that one, there's a publication. So it means, if I say you're a thief,
Mm.
if I say it to you in a closed room, just the two of us, and no one else hears it, that's me accusing you. That's more of an insult, which is also an actionable thing, but that's a
Never
different
something,
thing altogether. Secondly, it has to be the nature of the utterance has to be something that has the potential to or has the effect of diminishing one's reputation. So really, it's a reputational thing. I can say something nasty to you, but does it diminish your reputation to the public? And yeah,
who can be defamed?
okay. So defamation falls under the law of delict. And the law of delict is civil wrongs. So in simple terms, it's disputes between an ordinary person and another ordinary person. So essentially anybody can be defamed.
But should we all sue for defamation? I guess that's the next question. Because I mean, if someone posts something about me, must I take them to court?
Honestly, no. I can't think of many cases where I'd advise you to go to court just because you've been insulted. But I guess that takes you to the law of defamation because the decision of whether or not to sue is something that I think we often take lightly. You might actually have a case, but it's not in your interest to sue. And I'll tell you why. I might post about you and say, oh, she's doing XYZ, right? And you don't like it.
Mhm.
If you take me to court,
Mm.
you have to tell the court what I said.
Okay.
And what does that do?
It publicizes
It comes back up.
the issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're furthering this kind of harm.
And court records are like public.
Court
So
records are public.
now we all have
to see
access.
this. Exactly.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, people who wouldn't even have known about the post or whatever happened are not curious to say, what are these guys fighting about? And then it becomes, on and on. And with defamation, it tends to get worse before it gets better. And with the kind of court case that it is, we have to think about the kind of relief that you get. Or do you sue for, you sue for damages? And the quantity of your damages then now depends on how bad the defamation is. It falls under, the general law of insult. And that's always hard to determine because it's sensitive, yeah, body, and how do you measure it?
So in the case of a public figure, would you then say they should probably sue for defamation?
I wouldn't outright say anybody should sue for defamation, but there becomes more things to consider. So I think the easiest way for us to really explore what I'm trying to say is to look at actual cases. The most recent defamation case that I can think of that involves a public figure would be the Mahere versus Kappa case. With that one, you have a professional who works as an advocate, is also a public figure in that she's a well-known politician. You have somebody who comes up and, I don't remember the exact utterances, but this happens on X, which is a very public platform. She says things that have that diminish or question her credentials. They, it's alluding to nepotism and things of that nature, but basically has the effect of saying that this person doesn't deserve certain academic qualifications. And I think there were other things said. I didn't really follow the social media well. But then if you look at that case, you have somebody who has an interest to set the record straight to say that no, I did go to school, I achieved my qualifications, and this is false. And two, somebody who wants to, exonerate themselves and also prove a point to stop the other person, to say that you can't just go around and talk about me willy-nilly. What makes it worse is that I think the suggestion that they had some form of a friendship or a relationship before from school. So it's like somebody who knows you from the past coming to say that, well, I have this information on this person. We might just believe it because it's like, well, you guys know each other and clearly have a history in the past. So you can see why the plaintiff in this case would feel the need to say that, no, I'm going to sue. What then happens in the case, it was long, it was uncomfortable, and it was dragging. That effect that I spoke about, where people who would never even have known of this accusation, because like, I mean, I don't follow the other person. I wouldn't even have seen the post. But because it now becomes a court case, what's happening? Everybody's reporting about it. And because it involves a public figure, everyone is reporting about it. News then exaggerate. And because it's litigation, you're not always going to win. So you're taking a very big risk in the sense that you're going to republish all these things. You're going to even bring it more into the public light. And you might have a situation that the court said, well, it was a fair comment because it could be true. Yeah, depending on what was said. So really, especially from a lawyer's perspective, when you're assessing a case like this, you have to be very careful in determining is this worth it in the end. The quantum of the damages is also another thing because it's so hard to measure and define how much money I've lost. And it becomes an argument. And litigation, because of its nature, it can get really ugly and get really bad before it gets better. So this particular case is also a perfect example because there was more than one judgment on that particular case. I don't know if you followed it, but there's a time where one of the litigants then further accuses the same person of like improper dealing with the judge to the extent that she wanted the judge to recuse himself or bias. Again, also a very terrible judgment. It's just, it's not, defamation is the kind of thing that makes everybody else feel like we're observing and in the middle of somebody's very personal business. Just imagine if you were to have a fight with a friend or an ex-friend who's now talking, nasty things about you. No one likes to watch that. But you see, it happened and now it's in the public face. And interestingly, even if you read the judgment, the final judgment on the defamation, she wins the suit. She gets her damages. But in giving the judgment, the judge also says something to the nature of, this has been very uncomfortable, even for me, because I feel like these are two brilliant people minds. And this has just been a really terrible fight, right? So you get your relief in the end, but it's so many things, so much poking and scratching. And also, the freedom of expression part, you're now opening it up to the public for us to talk about what we think. Oh, do you believe what I believe? I think this and that. We're going to talk about it. We're going to share about it. So in holding that person accountable, at the same time, you give that same person a chance, a platform. So yeah, so it's a very difficult area to decide who should and who shouldn't. Although it applies to many areas of law, I think this one is a bit more sensitive because it really is a double-edged sword. You don't come out of a defamation suit clean. There's gonna be a lot of back and forth. You're gonna have to deal again with the things that were said about you. So it's a tricky decision, but in some cases, it's important for you to set the record straight and say, nah, I'm not going to make people just talk about me anyhow, because it does happen very kind. But at the same time, you have to know what it takes.
Okay. But those, on TikTok, for example, there's so much said this story happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Allegedly. Is that protecting anyone?
A little bit, but not so much. Right. So, like I said, every case will be taken on its own merits. So if you go, a lot of the time, these stories, you'll see that there's different ways of doing it. Some people will go on TikTok and they'll do a story time about their friend. And we don't know who it is until either that person does a response, a story time to be like, oh, I'm the friend, and this is my side of the story. Or, it just dies away like that. And then there's just a few people who know who it is. So in that case, you might have the case, you might not have the case, depending on one, how likely it that the ordinary person. So the test that the court uses is they look at it from the approach of the ordinary person reading the newspaper or watching the TikTok. Are they likely to think less of you? So one, it depends how obvious they make it that this is about you, right? So for example, even now with the case that I'm talking about, just a very popular case. Um, I didn't use anybody's full name, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? So if I said something that was insulting to one of the litigants in that case, they'd be able to take this video and say, well, clearly she's talking about me, and everybody knew that she was talking about me. So that becomes one element that you have to prove. So even if I say, allegedly this is what she said, um, they'll look at everything that we've said and say, well, even if you said allegedly, the way you're saying it kind of makes me believe that this happened and it's not an allegation of something that happened. You see? So it's tricky. So for me right now, I'm not talking about rumors. I'm talking about a reported case. So if I say, oh, even the child was uncomfortable, right? It might actually be tricky if there's no way that the judge said. So if she then goes and says, "Oh, this girl is defaming me because she's making it seem like this and that," then it becomes a question of, okay, one, is it obvious what I'm talking about, and two, you know, what are the ramifications? So, for example, allegedly is normally used, especially by journalists, if they're talking about an ongoing case that hasn't yet been determined, right? So if I say, um, Rumbi is a murderer, right? Or like, she murdered whatever. But then if I say allegedly, if you actually are accused of murder and are currently undergoing a murder trial, they can't say the thing because you are an alleged. Yeah, okay. You see.
But if I'm not,
If you're then exonerated,
if I'm just, this is just you. You just, no one said anything but you. You're the only one who's saying it.
I say allegedly she's a murderer. But you haven't actually been accused of being a murderer. Again, it will depend. What would the effect of it be?
I don't have friends, they're into school.
Because everyone thinks you're a murderer. You could actually prove that case.
Okay. So it's just a matter of what you can prove.
Yeah, and also what actually happened. Because if I come right to the internet and say, I was sitting, like, say maybe I make a TikTok after this, and I'm like, remember that girl I was talking to? She's an alleged murderer. And oh my gosh, I feel so unsafe. This is that and that. And then next thing you know, everybody you call for an interview doesn't want to be associated because of what I said. So that diminished your reputation, and you do have a case.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So if you're actually in the criminal courts now for murder, I'll be fine. But if but if you're not, then you'll be able to say that, like, I've literally never been arrested in my life. So now everyone thinks I'm an alleged murderer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you advise, this is now sort of out of the scope, that we deal with these things? Someone criticizes your work unnecessarily, by the way. Maybe it's also not even true. The court system, again, maybe you don't have the funds for litigation. You even maybe don't have the bandwidth for it. What's the course of action that you should take? Just out of, like advice.
Always be a case by case basis. You just have to look at it. You have to look at, is this just noise that will go away on its own, or is this something that is likely to keep on happening? Sometimes if it's something that is going to keep on happening, it's necessary for you to take an action so that the other person knows that this is not okay, I need to stop. Sometimes that can be achieved by something as simple as just a letter of demand to tell them to stop and get lawyers involved. And a lot of the time people will then back off. Sometimes what you want is a retraction. For example, if it's a very prominent media house, a newspaper, or something that says something that's incorrect about you, it's very important to set the record straight, because if someone is reading Newsday or a very trusted, reputable journalist says something that's inaccurate, becomes necessary for that person to acknowledge the error and retract it. You see it a lot of times. And a lot of the times, those are the kind of cases we actually do. It's like, oh, this person needs a retraction. Sometimes you need to set the record straight. A lot of companies, I think the most recent one was the OK saga, where someone wrote an article saying, oh, OK is in trouble, their shelves are empty, and then it became a thing in the public. And what did OK do? They didn't sue for defamation or whatever, which could be a remedy. They will release a public statement where you say, look, we see that this is happening online, but sometimes it's something that everyone is talking about. They're going to go and sue every single post and account that reposted and this and that and that. The extent can be so large that sometimes your solution is to just also post your side of the story to say that there's this rumor that's going on. This is the record. Especially if it's something to do with your business reputation, your livelihood, you might feel the need to act. Sometimes you're just a person that people like to talk about. If you're going to sue everybody that says something off about you, you'll be exhausted and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So litigation in general is not something that I personally would recommend people to do, but there are people who are known to be litigious. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. So it really just depends on yourself, your appetite for certain kinds of content, because it does get ugly, and you really have to weigh the importance of what's going on to against the cost of having to do something, the risk of actually making it worse before it becomes better, and just really overall, what's the long term effect.
Okay. No, thank you so much. I think we have a very different perspective now of defamation, and you now know how to go about these things. Final thing, what advice would you give to people in general as we navigate social media? How do we stay safe? Should we stay safe?
Social media and the social media environment is a lot. It's a lot. And I think people should remember that the internet does not forget. In law, generally, the rule is, if you're writing anything, write it like everybody's going to read it. Write it like it's going to end up somewhere in public. And if it's something that you're going to write even to her or to just like a safe person or even a disappearing message, if it's something that you wouldn't want anyone else to see, just don't write it.
Yeah.
Don't write it.
That's so
That's
true.
just the safest way to do it, because you will be held accountable for certain things. There's a lot of things that we're seeing now happening, whether it's in a WhatsApp group or something. People are screenshotting and it goes. Even if it's a post that you do for like 5 minutes, or you go live for 5 minutes and you rant and say certain things, people screen report that thing and say it's on, and it's on the internet and it doesn't forget. So especially if you're in your feelings, you're emotional, you're angry, and you just want to rant, maybe cool down. Cool down. But you see, now the problem we have now is we're so addicted to that process of the validation from the things that you say online, that now you want to be more outrageous. You now want to be more tricky. So you're going to get it. It's now part and parcel of the life that we live in. But yeah, my advice, if you don't want anybody to read it and see it, or you wouldn't want anybody to see what you said, then just don't put it in writing.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. This was fun. And yeah, give it everything. This was really enjoyable. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys learned something too. Comment, like, share. Let's talk about it.
So make sure to leave a comment and join the conversation. And make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, follow, and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss out on any updates. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon on
Legal.